Hey guys, welcome back to a new episode of Dev Drawer. Today we're going to be expanding a little bit on what we did last week. Last week we created a Sammy JS type website that will eventually turn into like a mobile app, but we're using Sammy JS for the routing. If you remember last week we created these two pages, so we have the home page and the about page, and it's being dynamically generated using the SammyJS routing that we have configured over here in our app.js file. So we have our home page and then our about page, and then it uses these templates that we've created here. So what I'm going to do in this tutorial is give you a way to pull dynamically from a database. So you're going to be able to pull your navigation at the top, these routes, as well as the content for those pages from a database. But before we get started in that, we need to set up this part of it just a little bit better. So whenever we go into our index.html, one thing that we're going to be worried about is that we're going to have to hit a API server, I guess, that we're going to create that uses PHP, and in order to do that we need to worry about CORS, which basically says that this website can't pull information from this website unless it's allowed to. And as you can see here, all of these references, we don't want to include all of these references to jquery.com and jsdeliver.net. So we're going to do what I normally do, and we're going to create this mini.min.js file, and then it's going to get rid of all of this stuff that's up here. So I'm going to go ahead and start working on that part now. So essentially we're going to go into our JS folder, we're going to create a new file, we're going to call it mini.min.js. And I've showed you how to do this many times, so I'm not going to come in here and show you how to get each one of them. I'm just going to copy and paste some code that I have that I've done before, and we're going to save that. And essentially what that's going to do is eliminate these three scripts from having to be externally called, and in their place we're just going to put in a reference to that JS file. So mini.min.js, and then we're going to do the same thing with our CSS. We're going to create a new file. We're going to call it mini.min.css, and then again I'm just going to copy and paste what I've previously done. You can reference other videos that I've showed you how to do that, namely our CRUD setup that we did. You can see how that was done. So let me go up here and we're going to copy this. Then we're just going to delete this here and change this to mini.min.css. Let me see, do we have our live server on? Alright, so we still have our live server running, so I'm going to go ahead and shut that down and then go live again, just so you can see that we are still using the live reload server that we've done in a previous video as well. So essentially it's this being live reloaded. And nothing else really changed. So if we go to the about page, go to the home page, all the jQuery is still working, everything's still working. I just kind of minified it and put it inside of its individual calls just to clean up the code a little bit and to make it where we can add the following tags to our index.html page, and that will allow us to hit this test server that we're going to be building. So we're going to add in a content security policy here, and that's going to tell our server that we're going to be setting up in WAMP. You can do it on a regular server. If you go back to one of our other tutorials, you can see how we've built a server using a solid state drive. So you can either do it that way, or in this case, since it's easier, I'm just going to go ahead and use WAMP to set everything up for the PHP and the database side of it. So in order to hit that server, we need to authorize that we have access to that server. So we have to do something here, and then we're going to have to do something on the other side. And then the other side of this is essentially just going to be a file that exists on this live server that we're already working in, and I'll show y'all how to do that in just a minute. But let's go ahead and implement our content security policy. So it's going to be meta HTTP equivalent, or equiv, equals content security SCURITY policy, and then we're going to have the content for this. First thing we want to do is do our default source, and then we're going to have one reference to self, which is essentially the website that we're on right now, and then we're going to reference to a server URL that we're going to create. So let's call it live. I think this one is, well, we don't have anything for it right now, so let's just do live api.local, which we'll create in just a second using WAMP. And then we also need to do our script source, again self, so that it knows to pull. That's why I moved all of those scripts into those folders, so it knows to pull from itself. And then we're also going to go ahead and do unsafe inline here, and we're going to close it out. So the unsafe inline means that if we have any inline CSS, that it will still run. Technically that's considered unsafe because there's ways that you can modify it, so it's up to you whether or not you would want to use that on a production. If we're going to be building an app, most likely they're not going to be modifying that the CSS that's inline. It'd be very difficult for them to do that. If they already know how to do it, then it might be a little bit easier, but for the most part, whenever we're building this out through iOS or Android, it's not really going to matter, so we can leave that in there. And again, this is all kind of what you want to do with it, so we're going to do it this way for this test purpose, but you might want to research the content security policy a little bit before you go to push anything out, because there could be some differences based on what you're actually wanting to accomplish. Okay, so we got that done. There was another change that I want to do that on this page right here. Okay, so as you can see, it tried to break it for a second, but refreshing it allowed it to come back up. But one thing that I noticed here, we were developing it previously in the mobile only version of it, so I'm going to clear this up a little bit, make it a little bit easier to use on a desktop, because that's what we're going to be developing for the most part here, and then we'll get into developing it mobile wise. It should pretty much do the same thing, but for right now we're going to take our nav bar and we're going to just move it out of this row in this container and then push it up here. And then we're also, I'm going to go ahead and remove the BG light and the nav bar light class that's inside of it and just keep the expand as well as a nav bar. And then let's see, I think we can leave this the same. I don't really want to reference Bootstrap's icons. I never really use Bootstrap's navbar. I think it's ugly, but for this tutorial I used it initially, so I'm gonna go ahead and keep it in there. So I'm just gonna change this to menu, and then down here we're gonna eventually dynamically generate these, but for now I'm going to leave these the way that they are. And I think that should clear this up. So if we go back to our page, now we have our navbar and our menu, and I'm actually going to decrease the size of that a little bit so you can see the desktop version of it. So home and about, they stay the same. Okay, so now we got that part cleared up. Let's go ahead and start creating our, I guess, our API server. And it's a simplified API. This is in no way ready for production. There's no authentication on it. There's nothing like that. So we can get to that in a future tutorial, but right now we're essentially going to be calling a PHP function or functions from a AJAX call inside of this to populate the page information. So title, content, slug, stuff like that, permalink, in order to make it where that we can actually use it on this system. But again, this API is not a full API, so I wouldn't use it on production, but you can use this as a jumping point for you getting something started on production. So we're going to create a new folder and we're going to call it API. Inside of this folder we're going to create a new folder and we're going to call it config. This is where our database connections will reside. And then we're also going to create a htaccess file. htaccess file, which it controls server variables. Like for example, we don't want it to say pages.php, we want it to say pages. And then we also want to make sure that this API folder for this specific server on WAMP is the I guess the root URL for it, so that way we don't have to type in the full URL every single time we want to do something with this code. So we're also going to, let's go ahead and create a new file. We're going to call it pages.php because this is what we're going to hit whenever we go to call those functions. inside of our config folder, we're going to create a database.php, and this again is where our database will reside. And you can see how we've done databases in the past in some of our other videos, like the PHP CRUD video. This is the exact same thing. So MySQLi, and then we're going to do new MySQLi, and then we're going to pass the variables that we need for this. So localhost, because it will be a local host on our server, and I'm using the root and a blank password because we're using WAMP again, and I haven't set anything for that because this server is not something that I really worry with. It's a completely virtual server only for these tutorials. It just makes it easier for me. And then we're going to do live is going to be the database name, and then because we're on WAMP and we have another server running internally that we use for development through my company, we're going to go ahead and pass this 3308 port number because I don't want it to be looking at the wrong server. Alright, so that's all we need to do in our database.php file. Let's go back to our htaccess file. So there's a few different things that you can do in your htaccess file if you've never done it before. I'm going to copy and paste some of the generic stuff that I've done, and I'll tell you which each one does so you know how to do it. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to turn on follow simulated links, and then minus the multi-views. That just means basically that some of these links that we're passing to it won't actually exist except for in code, so it's going to follow these symbolic links. I said simulated earlier, but symbolic links. This just allows it to pass URLs that don't technically exist. They're not looking for a specific file. And that's something we can use later, but for right now we're only going to have one file that is going to be hidden, so I'm not too worried about it. And then we turn our rewrite engine on, and then we rewrite this base to API. Again, that is being used because we don't want it to we don't want to have to type in /API/ whatever we're trying to hit every single time we want to run something on this server. And then basically the rest of it is where we're removing the PHP extension. So instead of having pages.php inside of our URL, we can just do pages. Or if you want to encrypt that page URL name, you can do that, and you won't have to worry about having extensions visible and stuff like this. And it makes it a little bit easier, a little more secure. Again, not production ready, but makes it a little bit better so that people can't just guess what your next pages are. And essentially that's what that does. It just removes the PHP extension and just links out to the page without the extension on it. So we're going to close out our htaccess now, and then in our pages we're just going to leave this blank for right now because we're not actually hitting it yet. So let's see what else. Oh, we need to create the server. So let's go over here to, I got our WAMP spun up already, and we're going to create a new virtual host. And over here we need to reference the folder of this, so let me reveal it in File Explorer. I know y'all can't see this part, but this is basically just I'm pointing out to this folder directly, and then we're going to call it live API .local is I think what we called it. Let's go over here. Live API.local, live API.local. Alright, so we're going to create that, and you can't see what I'm doing now, but as you can see over here, it's telling me that the files have been modified and I need to restart the DNS in WAMP. If you're familiar with WAMP, you'll know how to do this. You just basically right click, go to tools, and then restart your DNS. And now if we go back to our local host, now we can browse out to live API.local, and as you can see here, it's actually hitting this PHP file. Hold on, let me think about something. It should not be, well, that's because there's no index.php page. So it's displaying the pages. So if we actually click on pages.php, okay, so I figured out what I did wrong. I put in, whenever I was doing the folder directory, I put in the /API for here, so I ended up going into the virtual host configuration for WAMP and removing the /API from the virtual host configuration. And now if you click on this, it brings up the live API.local, which is essentially the same thing as we were viewing previously, but now we can actually browse out to /API, and then now if we click on pages, it actually shows a blank page, which it's supposed to do. So I linked out to the API part of it. Normally I would do that because I'm using a subdomain for the API, not necessarily a folder inside of it. So I had to create this server, even though it's only going to exist essentially for the API usage in this case, but I had to create the server in order to access those files. So hopefully you guys can fix that on your side as well. But essentially we have our pages.php that we want there. We're currently doing our live server here. So now we have the server that's connected. So now we need to start creating these pages.php information, and then I'll show you how to use the AJAX to grab those pages. So essentially what we're going to need to do is create a function here that grabs a title content based on a slug that's passed over through the AJAX call. So let's go ahead and create a function, and we're going to call it getPage, and then we're going to pass the slug variable, and then we're going to, oh wait, nope, that is not where I wanted to do that at. Actually, there we go. Okay, so I was looking at the AJAX that I had done previously. So what we need to do on this part is we need to allow access to this page from the previous, from the actual live server. So there's a few ways that you can do that, and I'm not going to write all of these, but I will copy and paste them so that you can see them. So let's do our opening PHP tag, and then we're going to paste these headers. So the first header you see is allow access access control allow origin with a asterisk. That just basically means any server can hit this API server, which is not something you want to have in production. What you would actually do is control this through the URL that's going to be hitting it. In this case, we're going to be doing app, so there's not really a URL, so star may be the best way to do it, but you can control other aspects of it, so the allowed headers, methods, stuff like that. So you just basically, you have to see how you're going to use it. If you're going to use it as a web desktop application, or not desktop but a website, and you're going to be doing this, you only need to allow access from the server that's going to be hitting it, so that not everything can hit it. The next part is the allowed methods. You can do post, get, set, stuff like that. We're going to be doing post because we're going to be sending over the values as a post through AJAX, because that is a little bit more secure, because you're not passing that full URL every single time. It's actually passing over the variables in a hidden post field. Next thing we're going to do is the allowed headers, and that's X requested with, and that is essential for what we're trying to do. So this part right here is something that you definitely need to have on there, because that allows you to specify that it's being requested from this server to this server. And then finally we're going to be passing over the content type of this page is going to be returned as a JSON. Because that's what we're going to be using whenever we get into the AJAX. And then we're also going to have the max age set to 3600, so that after 3600 milliseconds, it expires. So it's a little bit secure. Again, this is not production ready, and I think I actually have this on there twice. Allowed headers. Actually, let's go ahead and get rid of this one and keep this one, because this allows the content, access control, allow headers, authorization. Actually, you know what? I'm going to leave this because that's the way I tested it. This might be a mistake on my part. So you might not even need this part. But I'm going to go ahead and leave it in there just in case. So now we have created access to our server from the AJAX call that's going to happen. Whenever we start to work on this, we're going to be passing over these post variables that are coming to us. But first thing we need to do is do include once, and we're going to include that config/database.php, and now you can see why we included that API inside of our htaccess, the rewrite base, or else we would have to do /API/ blah 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 to include any kind of files on it. So let's go ahead and get into the first one we want to do, and we're just going to list out these pages to use in the navigation as well as use in the routing. So we're going to do if post, and then we'll pass these variables to the AJAX script whenever we get ready to call it. But we're going to say that if post type equals list, we are going to call a function called list pages, and then let's go ahead and do end if. Now let's create this function, list pages, and inside of this we are going to pass over our global MySQLi, which is the variable that we created in our database.php file. So this MySQLi here, that's just going to pass over the database connection information for us. So then we're going to do statement equals MySQLi prepare, and then we're going to do our select statement. So select slug title from pages order by let's see, we're going to do order by, and then we're going to create a variable called order ID so that you can actually control the order of those pages inside of the navigation. Then we're going to do statement execute, because we don't need to pass anything to this one, so it's just a straight call. And then we're going to do result equals statement get underscore result. Then we are going to check to see if the results have a value, and then else and if. So if result num rows is not equal to 0 or equals to 0, then we are going to we're just gonna we can do nothing right now, so we don't really need to worry about that because it will have a call. So let's do row equals result fetch a sock, and then we're going to create a pages array, which is going to contain all of the information that we want to have inside of it here. And we might want to go ahead and let's declare this pages equals array. Okay, alright, so now that we've gotten our data, nothing yet is being pulled from it because we don't actually have that table created yet. So we are going to just use this as a boilerplate for us. So let's do statement close, and then whenever we're returning something to an AJAX script, we need to return it in a JSON format. So let's do echo JSON encode, and then we're just going to encode that pages array that is currently there. Okay, so that's essentially the first function that we want to create for list pages, and now I'm going to go over and create the database for it so that it matches up with what we're trying to do when we're trying to pull it. So root, no password, MySQL, and I think we call this, what do we call it? Live. Alright, so let's create a database, and we're going to call it live, create that database. And now we're going to go back to our pages, and we're going to do slug title from pages. So we need to create a database table called pages, and we want to have an ID, a slug title, content, and an order ID. So we need to have 5 columns. So let's list these out. So ID, order ID, slug or permalink or whatever you want to do if you're coming over from WordPress, and then title and content. So the content we're going to set as a text. Title we're going to do varchar, let's do 100. Slug we're also going to do varchar, let's do 100. These two can stay IDs, but we want to have our first ID as a auto increment. We're going to set it as the primary key, and that should do it for our table structure. Let's go ahead and create a few different pages. Let me zoom out of this a little bit so you can see it better. Okay, so don't have to do anything here. Let's set this order ID as 1. The slug, we're just going to leave it blank because it's going to be the home page. So let's do home, and then the text. For right now, we're just going to do the HTML ourselves. So this is the home page. And then we close out that HTML. And then we're going to do another one here that's going to be 2. And it's going to be about. And then about us. This is the About Us page. Okay, so then we go here, make sure everything's populated. Alright, so that's what we want to do. So now we know we got the slug, the title. Since this is only the navigation, that's all we need for these. So inside of this pages array that we're getting, we need to pass the variables that we want. So this array is going to consist of the slug, and it's going to be row slug. Then next will be title, and it's going to be row title. And I think that's all we need to pass there. Let's go ahead and set this pages equals null just to have it on there. And then we need to make sure we return the right variable, or else it's going to be breaking, and I'm going to try to figure out why it's happening. So that should be the first call that we want to do. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this inside of our JSON, or inside of our app.js, which we've created here, and we're actually going to kind of restructure this a little bit so that it pulls these pages dynamically, and then the only thing we need to do is just make sure there's a template that's assigned to it. Alright, so let's take this function and we're going to remove it out of here, and we're going to create another function called list pages. And there's a method to my madness, so bear with me just a second. So function list pages, we don't need to pass anything to it, but essentially what this is going to do is going to grab that navigation at the top, and then we'll go in there and call this get pages and make it a little bit more dynamic as well. So let's do var pages equals, we're just going to do a blank array, and then we're going to do an AJAX call. Okay, so inside of our AJAX call, we're going to be hitting that URL that we created. So it's going to be http live, I think it was live.local. Where is it at? Live API.local. Live API.local, and then we're going to call that API / pages. And then we're going to pass a type. So the type is going to be post. Then here. Okay, and then the data type that we're going to be passing is going to be JSON, so we kind of keep everything the same. Because it's receiving JSON, it's pushing out JSON. And then the data that we're going to be passing is going to be the type that we're looking for in the function. So we're going to do type, and then we're just going to say list. Now, inside of your AJAX, you need to have a success. So function data, and then you also need to have a error, just in case something's happening, you will know why. So with our error, it's kind of iffy because you can't actually see the error because the parameters that are being returned is JSON. So it's going to give you a generic error, but you may have to go into your PHP and then turn it to get values and go check it to make sure that everything's working the way you want it to. Or you can use something like Postman or something like that to actually hit that API and make sure that whatever values are needing to be passed are being passed. But just something you can worry about. So I'm just going to name this a variable, then text. That's not what I wanted to do here. Okay, text status, and then error thrown, and then we're going to just do a console.log, and then we're just going to log that error thrown. Okay, so in production you'd want to remove this so that people can't see why your API or your AJAX call is not working, but for right now we're just going to leave this in here. So let's go ahead and see if it returns anything. So we're going to do a console.log and then data. And now if we go back to our browser here and refresh, we should be able to inspect the element and open up the console and see that it is passing the database items. So a blank slug, about, home, and about us. So that's what we're looking for. So what we want to do now is take these two links and remove them from the website and replace it with what's being populated here. So in order to do that, we need to we need to append to that nav bar that we've created on the other side. So first thing we're going to do is, since this is coming back as an array, we're going to do .each data. Then we're going to pass a function where it grabs the ID of the array value, the ID as well as the item, and then we are going to what am I doing here? .each data. Why is this here? Hold on, just a second. Oh, that's because I need to close this. Okay, and then we're going to just pass inside of the nav bar. It's called nav bar dash nav, and then we're going to do an append, and then that's where we're going to pass that li item. Now I got the nav bar dash nav. If you look at index.html, we got the down here nav bar dash nav here, which is where these LIs are existing. So inside of our JavaScript, we're going to copy this because we want it to look exactly like that, and we're going to put it here. Now with JavaScript you can't have multiple lines, so we're going to make everything kind of run together a little bit so that we get rid of any JavaScript errors. Now the things that we want to change here is that if it is a page, it's going to go to that slug and then add the title here. So the first thing we want to do is we're going to close out the single quote here, add a plus sign, and then we're going to it's item, so we're going to do item dash slug because that's what we're passing it over with in the array, and then we're going to close that out, and then here we're going to do item dash title, I believe it was. Let's go back and look. Title and slug. So we got our slug and the title here. So now if we save this and go back to our browser, now we can see we have two different pages. We can also see that it changes if we change this to descending. Now it's about us home because now this is 2, this is 1. So let's keep it at ascending for right now, and we can go inside of here and delete the LIs inside of this because they're being populated through JavaScript now. Alright, so I think this is a good stopping point for us since we were able to integrate AJAX, a simplified API, and be able to populate data to this website using Sammy and using JavaScript and all of this stuff to tie it into the MySQL database. I think the next video we're going to continue this and start being able to populate the content of the pages through Sammy as well as the database and using our API and AJAX all over again. But for now, I think this is going to end this tutorial. If you liked it, smash the like button for me, please. I have a lot of people that watch the videos but don't necessarily subscribe or like the videos, but if you like it, let me know. And if you want to see more content like this, definitely subscribe, because I have something that comes out every week. So I guess this is it for now, and I'll talk to you later.